Hi, my name is Robert Hetzler, and thank you for watching this Quadro video seminar series that I'm doing in terms of offering free educational series on Quadro and common mistakes when drafting settlement agreements. One of the questions, or one of the things that I see as an issue all the time, is when dealing with specifically with defined contribution plans, the marital portion. And even more specific than that, the premarital non-marital portion. So what I mean by that is I'll often receive a settlement agreement that simply says the husband shall be entitled to 50% or the 50% of the marital portion of the wife's 401k plan, and it shall specifically exclude any premarital component. And simply that's all it says. Well, the problem becomes, and again, we're only dealing, when we're talking about marital portion, today's video, we're only talking about the premarital portion of the non-marital portion. And so settlement agreements oftentimes won't talk about, or take the additional step and talk about how you're going to calculate the premarital portion, and specifically whether appreciation is going to be considered. And let me give you kind of an example. Say you have a husband and wife and they get married in 1990, and in 1985 the wife, who in my example is a participant and the one that's got the 401k, started contributing in 1985. And then in 1990 she gets married, and they go along for 15-20 years and stay married, and then when they go to get divorced, the settlement agreement simply says that the husband shall be entitled to 50% of the marital portion of the wife's 401k and shall not be entitled to any premarital portion. Well, that sounds simple enough, and we get the general idea as Quadro preparers, but the problem lies in how to calculate that premarital portion. And if you simply look at a statement, assuming the parties even have a statement from the date of marriage, because oftentimes they don't, but let's assume that they do have a statement, and that statement showed in my example that the wife had $10,000 at the time they got married. Well, the other issue that comes into place, because the parties, unless it's spelled out in the agreement, I can assure you will have a different position, is what about the appreciation on that non-marital component? And in my example, the wife is certainly going to, in all likelihood, assume that not only is the $10,000 that she had at the time they got married non-marital, but also anything that she made in terms of market fluctuation, interest, anything that she may have made on it. And we're going to assume that over a long marriage that the value went up and not down. You can certainly have the reverse be true if you have a short marriage, but we all know that historically the stock market over the long period goes up. So we're going to assume, for my example, there's appreciation. Well, the wife is going to assume clearly that if the stock is now, or if the holdings are now valued at $25,000 based on the non-marital being $10,000 at the time of marriage, she's going to assume that entire amount is non-marital. Whereas the husband, in my example, is most likely going to assume that, hey, it was only $10,000 at the time we got married. That's the only thing that's not included when we do this division. So in the settlement agreement, when you say excluding the non-marital or the premarital portion, you certainly want to make sure that you talk about appreciation and whether that's included or excluded, meaning if it's excluded from the calculations, then fine. If it's included, meaning that not only is the $10,000 non-marital, but also any appreciation is included in the calculation, then you also need to take the additional step, and in the settlement agreement, go ahead and define how you're going to calculate that. And what I mean also by that is many times, and especially on longer term marriages, the parties are not going to have statements from the date of marriage through the date of divorce. And certainly if they rebalance their portfolios, they're going to have different holdings throughout the time of the marriage. So it's going to be very hard to trace, even for financial experts like myself, to trace the exact value of that $10,000 non-marital or premarital portion. So oftentimes what I recommend to people is to get an idea of what the holdings were in the 401k, or get an idea of what the historical year-over-year returns were, and to go ahead and agree to an appreciation rate in the settlement agreement. That way it's clear. So if you agree to 6%, 7%, 10%, whatever, if it's spelled out in, excuse me, in the settlement agreement, then when you go to prepare the quadro and you want to exclude the premarital component, then that calculation is a fairly easy calculation to do, because as you can see that if it's not defined in the settlement agreement or outlined in the settlement agreement, it can certainly lead to conflict of views or potentially more litigation in the future. So I think the key takeaways here are: make sure that if you have a premarital component to a defined contribution plan, which are your 401ks, your 457s, your 403bs, your thrift savings plans, if you have a non-marital or a premarital component to that, you want to make sure to address in the settlement agreement the appreciation on the premarital component, and if that is going to be continued to be non-marital, then you certainly want to address how to calculate it, because it's going to be very challenging to trace it back depending on the length of the marriage and look at every single statement. And I've seen time after time again where parties, especially on longer term marriages, the difference in one party's calculation versus another party's calculation can be fairly significant, and you can have, as we all know, experts that disagree, and they can both be right depending on the method they use. So certainly make sure that you deal with appreciation, how to calculate appreciation in the settlement agreements, and clearly defined all important dates when calculating marital portion. So date of employment, date the marriage started, date the marriage ended, or if you picked another date in terms of when to stop calculating the marital portion, whether that's the date of filing, date of separation, the date of the final judgment, or some other arbitrary date. Make sure that all those dates are included in the settlement agreement, because the more information you have, the less likely that you're going to end up in any type of potential conflict when it comes time to do the quadro. So I hope you enjoyed the video. One thing I would like to mention that I'm really excited about is we're starting our first quadro webinar. It's going to start next month. And not only are we doing the quadro webinar, it's a two-part webinar series. So we're going to have the first webinar, and then what we're going to do is it's going to be interactive. So we're going to have all the attorneys that signed up and participated in the initial webinar are going to provide feedback and questions that they want answered that maybe weren't answered in there. And this way we're going to have time to gather all the questions, and then we're going to have a second webinar specifically addressing all those questions, and then we're going to have that transcribed so that it becomes like a go-to guide for all the divorce attorneys frequently asked questions when it comes to quadros. And not only that, and again I'm seem a little bit excited because I am, is I've drafted up several or multiple ebooks dealing with finance and divorce, financial security and divorce checklist. And what I'm doing is, for those that sign up for the webinar, I'm going to give those to you. You can clone those as your own. You can use them as handouts for your office. You can create a cover sheet. You could be the author. You have all the rights to use those books. They can be put on your website to attract new clients. I'm providing them in Word format, so if you want to change anything, but I think you'll thoroughly enjoy them. They can be good marketing pieces of information for you, and that'll be 2 ebooks that'll be provided. We're going to have some sample discovery documents, request when dealing with quadros, what to request. We're going to throw in a few forensic accounting type of discovery documents as kind of a bonus. I know that we're not talking about that. We're going to have another webinar on forensic accounting, but I'm certainly going to go ahead and give you that, and give you all that in Word format, as well as a quadro checklist, the PowerPoint presentation that goes along with the seminar, the webinar, and all of that good stuff. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope that you sign up for it.